This is Zebzones. Good evening. Jeremy Corbyn has said Labour's pledge to provide fast and free broadband by nationalising the network will transform people's lives. Boris Johnson called the plan a crazed communist scheme. President Trump has attacked a former US ambassador to Ukraine as she was giving evidence to the impeachment inquiry against him, behaviour the Democrats described as witness intimidation. Hong Kong has gone into recession for the first time in 10 years, with officials blaming the anti-government demonstrations for the downturn. Street protesters in Chile have won a significant victory, a referendum on replacing a constitution that dates from the dictatorship of General Pinochet. Some of Britain's best-known athletes are taking legal action against their own Olympic Association over sponsorship rules. Jeremy Corbyn has compared Labour's plan to deliver free, full-fibre broadband to every home in the UK over the next 10 years to the building of public waterworks in the 19th century and the creation of the NHS in the 20th. The scheme includes bringing parts of BT into public ownership. They would be run by a new agency called British Broadband. In a speech in Lancaster, the Labour leader said the costs, which he put at £20 billion, would be partly funded by technology giants paying a fair level of tax. The Prime Minister has dismissed Labour's proposals as a crackpot and crazed communist scheme. Our political correspondent Nick Eardley reports from Lancaster.
Labour's broadband plan is one of the most eye-catching of the election campaign so far, and deliberately so. It would involve nationalising the open reach arm of BT and then a programme of installing full fibre broadband across the country, starting with areas whose coverage is currently poor before moving on to towns and cities by the end of the decade. In his speech, Jeremy Corbyn said broadband infrastructure here had fallen behind many other countries and it was now too important an issue to leave to private corporations. The Labour leader said universal services under public ownership could be run for the British people instead of for profit.
The internet has become such a central part of our lives. What was once a luxury is now an essential utility. That's why full fibre broadband must be a public service, bring communities together with equal access.
But this is one of a number of expensive commitments from Mr Corbyn. He also wants to bring rail services and water back under public control. Then there are significant spending commitments on the health service and a so-called green revolution. The Conservatives say it's unaffordable. Campaigning in Oldham and Greater Manchester, Boris Johnson offered this analysis.
Not like the crazed communist scheme that was outlined earlier on today. We will give people gigabit broadband by 2025.
Others have raised questions too. The Lib Dems said the plan was another unaffordable item on a wish list. The SNP said it was pie in the sky. But Mr Corbyn insisted that the pledge was affordable and that it showed Labour was serious about implementing real change if it wins power.
Full fibre broadband is a newer, faster technology which relies entirely on fibre optic cables instead of the older copper cabling. It can deliver speeds of up to 1 gigabit per second and is said to be 5 times more reliable than a copper cable connection. Labour's proposals have drawn a hostile reaction from broadband providers and the wider business community. BT has challenged the party's figures for the costs involved. Its share price fell sharply this morning before recovering much of that lost ground. The CBI said the rollout of the full fibre broadband was already underway and nationalisation would only slow it down. Our business editor Simon Jack has been considering some of the logistics.
The average household's broadband bill is £30 a month. Under Labour's proposal, it would eventually be totally free, but not to the taxpayer, who Labour estimate would foot a bill of around £20 billion. BT boss Philip Jansen told the BBC the real cost would be much higher.
We're talking 30 to 40 billion pounds per building. And if you're giving it away, it's, again, a sort of 8-year time frame. It's another 30, 40 billion pounds. So you're not short of 100 billion pounds. Plus, if you get into who owns it and would it be owned by the government, would it be owned by the state or the public sector? So all I'm saying is it needs to be very carefully thought through.
Labour intends to raise an additional £230 million a year by taxing technology giants like Facebook, Google and Amazon. But most industry experts say that would not cover the cost of running a business with 32,000 employees. Also, if BT is giving broadband away for free, what would that mean for BT's competitors like Virgin Media, TalkTalk and Sky? The Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell hopes they will get on board with the scheme, get on board with the idea, but if they don't, they could be nationalised too.
We'll come to an agreement with them, and it'll either be by either an agreement of access arrangements or working alongside us, or yes, if necessary, they can then come within the ambit of the British broadband itself.
All parties and all companies agree that providing faster broadband would boost the UK economy by speeding up links between businesses and their customers. There is very little agreement on how to do it.
Speaking in Lancaster, the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell denied that Labour's plan represented a return to the nationalisation of the 1970s. Our economics editor Faisal Islam has this assessment of the party's thinking.
Whereas Margaret Thatcher turned the privatisations of the 1980s into share giveaways to some voters, this Labour move seeks to do the exact reverse nearly 4 decades on, to turn state ownership into a voter-friendly retail policy of free broadband for all. It really is 2 policies in one. The idea behind nationalisation has traditionally been about industrial policy, the government taking control of strategic parts of the economy. This move is more than that. It shifts the state further into the provision of what are known as universal basic services, health, education, and now broadband too. Since the early 1980s, even before BT was privatised and the internet existed, Labour politicians have argued for a government rollout of fibre optic connections. The UK led the world in this technology, but in the 1980s the government prioritised alternative cable technology, and we now lag behind many other countries. Labour seeks to correct this by running fibre broadband provision from Whitehall. But this isn't even the really radical part of this policy. Insisting that the provision of broadband to consumers is both state-owned and free marks a big break from the past. How it would work is unproven. In essence, Labour is trying to add populist appeal to a policy of the state controlling key services.
Boris Johnson has been taking questions from the public in a BBC phone-in. He was challenged on a variety of issues, including why the government hadn't published a report by Parliament's Intelligence Security Committee into alleged Russian interference in UK elections. He also faced questions about his private life. Here's our political correspondent, Helena Wilkinson.
Boris Johnson spent the morning taking questions from perhaps the